Let's discuss with former Missouri State Highway Patrol Captain Ron Johnson and Albany, New York Police Chief Eric Hawkins. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Chief, I want to start with you. What is something that President Biden could announce today or do that would bring down crime and particularly gun violence in cities like yours?
Well, I think, first of all, I like to hear the president convey an appreciation to local law enforcement officers around this country for the hard work they're doing. I think that for the top elected official to publicly come out and praise the officers for what they've done, particularly over these last 1.5 years or so, will be a big morale boost. But in terms of some specific things, I like to hear that there is some funding to assist local law enforcement with addressing this surge of illegal guns and other illegal weapons in our communities across this country. It's having a devastating impact. It's traumatizing the people in our communities, and it'd be nice to hear that there is some funding available to help us deal with that.
Specifically on guns, let's stick with the president's push for an assault weapons ban, Captain. Would that have a dramatic impact on the types of crimes that are happening in Missouri to resurrect what we saw about 20, 30 years ago?
I think it'll have an impact, but I think we've got to look at the gun issue as a whole. When we look at the everyday crime that goes on in the urban cities like St. Louis, Baltimore, Chicago, and other cities, they're involving several types of weapons. And so I think we have to look at the issue as a whole. I think it is a start. It's definitely something that is an issue for us in America. We've had many incidents that have involved assault weapons, but we've got to look at this gun issue as a whole and really look at it. How do we change that, impact that, and begin to save lives across our country?
Chief, I just want you to comment on the incredible whiplash that you and so many police chiefs must be experiencing in terms of politicizing the police. I mean, obviously, after George Floyd's murder, there was a call from a handful of progressive Democrats to defund the police, and then the pendulum swings so quickly to now you hear this handful of Republicans who are calling for defund the FBI. One said destroy the FBI because of the search of Donald Trump's home. Just tell us what it's like to have the policing be so political right now.
It's been a very difficult time for us in law enforcement over these last couple of years. We understood in law enforcement as a whole that overall reform, was something that was necessary. I mean, there were some things that were happening in law enforcement that we understood could be improved. Some things could be changed. Some things could be thrown out altogether. But we also understood that there was a lot of good that was in law enforcement, a lot of good things that were happening. And so when we saw that this pendulum did in fact move way too far over when this all started to happen. And so we're at this awkward place right now, where we're going through reform movements in the city of Albany. We're 100% buying into this idea that we have to have some sort of reform in policing in our city. But we've got to preserve all of the good things that have been going on in our city as well. And we got to understand that if mistakes were made in the movement at the very outset, and we recognize that some of those mistakes were made in terms of the reforms that people were proposing in law enforcement in general, that now is the time to recognize that and acknowledge it. Just like law enforcement had to acknowledge that there were some things that needed to be changed, I think that now we have to overall acknowledge that there are some things with the reform movement that can be adjusted as well, and we can still get the reform that was necessary in law enforcement. But at the same time, we can allow our officers to have the tools, resources, and support that they need to adequately protect our communities.
Captain, the White House has said that we're going to hear about initiatives to support community policing, building relationships between departments and the communities they serve, something that you prioritized when you were working in Missouri, especially around Ferguson. What works? What do you want specifically to hear from the president today that will change the climate in some of these cities?
I think we have to put some funding there. I think we've come to use community policing as a buzzword, but I think we have to make sure we're funding those programs. We're making sure that law enforcement is staffed well enough where officers can actually get out and actually do community policing. And that isn't riding in their cars. It's actually being on, like the old days, on bikes and on foot patrol. But we've got to have funding there. And I would like today this word defunding. I've never liked it. We need to get away from it. I think that, like the chief has talked about, a lot of police departments across our country are instituting new programs and doing many new things. And I think that word really, it's been a negative for our communities and also for the men and women that go out every day and try to make our communities safe. And so I hope the president hits on that. I will say that I believe our president is real supportive of law enforcement, but we've got to come out and say it. We've got to come out and be strong in our verbiage that says that. And I think it will bode well for our country.
All right, Captain Ron Johnson and Chief Eric Hawkins, thank you for your time and thank you for the work you do.